Hello and welcome to the Extremis Publishing podcast. I'm Tom Christie. Today's subject is going to be a subject of great interest to anyone who knows Stirling, Forth Valley and the history of the area, and that is Forthgiving, which is a trading name of the Sons of the Rock Society. It's a very unique organisation, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Ellen Dickie, who is the current Praesies or chairperson of the organisation, and Nick Cooke, who's the organisation's outgoing secretary. Welcome both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I'm delighted to be joining you today to discuss this very interesting topic, because the Sons of the Rock Society goes back a very, very long time. In fact, I think back to about 1808. Wouldn't that be right?
1809.
It's certainly an organisation that has made a huge impact on Stirling, but it has a very interesting genesis, doesn't it?
Indeed. It's very interesting to me as a historian that this society came in existence 2 years after the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, and Glasgow was quite a hotbed of anti-slavery protest, and I think that some of the people who were motivated by that then looked around and realised that there was an awful lot more they could do within the Glasgow neighbourhood, surrounded by appalling deprivation.
Yeah, because so much has changed in society, and yet in many ways the challenges that we face are very much the same. And I think Forthgiving now, as then, is very much concerned with finding practical solutions to the issues that are facing society today. Yet it has been a very distinctive organisation. It's one that has had so much of an impact, not just on Stirling but on the Forth Valley area. Would you like to say a bit more about the influence that it's had over the centuries?
Yes, this has changed greatly over 200 years. I think it was very much involved in the relief of poverty through pensions that were awarded to the deserving poor, as it was then seen all through the 19th century and into the first half of the 20th, indeed. And then came the welfare state. And I think a repositioning of the organisation was inevitable. And by the time I became involved as a member in the late 1990s, I think the society was beginning to rather wonder which way it should go. And I've been very, very pleased and impressed, I think, by the fact that over the last 15, 20 years, I think the society, or the Forthgiving as we now call the charity, has found a very much more practical and positive role than I think it's ever had recently, thanks to the work of some very hard-working trustees, and I think we are now seen to be very much an important part of the funding network for people in need.
Well, for any listeners who are perhaps not familiar with Stirling and its surroundings, the Sons of the Rock Society takes its name from the Castle Rock upon which the current Stirling Castle stands. Of course, there have been a number of different settlements in that place. In particular, during the Wars of Independence, the castle would have looked quite different, and we believe, of course, that there were different tribal settlements there even before that. So, I mean, even going back to antiquity and prehistory, it certainly has a very long history. But the organisation itself, the Sons of the Rock, has an exceptionally proud heritage, because it goes all the way back, as Nick has mentioned, to Victorian times, and there's certainly an exceptional historical record of the work of the society in that time. The Stirling Smith Art Gallery and Museum, for instance, has in their archive a variety of photographs of members of the organisation, and there have certainly been some very prominent figures as part of the organisation in that time. Isn't that the case?
Yes, I think perhaps the most famous individual member is probably a former Prime Minister, Campbell Bannerman, who was only Prime Minister for a very short time right at the beginning of the 20th century. But of course he was a Stirling MP, and I think this bears out the fact that being a member of the Sons of the Rock Society was seen as a great honour, almost an accolade for the great and the good. And there was still quite a hint of this by the time that my wife and I joined, and I think that's now very much in the past. We've moved on from there, And I think now the focus is very much more on what we do as a charity rather than who we are. But yes, I mean, I think over the 200 years there have been some quite famous people involved.
Yes, because one of the really distinctive things about the organisation is its Old Hansel Monday lecture. And you've certainly had some very, very prominent names who have become established over the years who have taken part in that lecture.
We conceived the idea of restructuring the Old Hansel Monday event about 15 years ago now. And it has now become a well-established lecture and supper held in Stirling or Falkirk each mid-January on Old Hansel Monday. And I think the very first year we did this was 2005 or 6, something. Anyway, we had a talk on the agricultural revolution in the castle of Stirling by an expert in that field, which was absolutely fascinating. I think the following year we then had our former MP Michael Forsyth talking about Campbell Bannerman and what he achieved, and we've had a cross-section of historians, politicians, and journalists who've given us a sort of very broad range of talks about not just the heritage of Stirling, but also I think the whole charity scene and that across the Forth Valley much more generally. Yeah.
And isn't that really one of the things that makes Forthgiving quite a unique organisation in that sense? Is it because yes, there is the emphasis towards philanthropy, but there's also a very strong cultural history aspect as well.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. In addition to our Old Hansel Monday events, we've also introduced members events where we visited places of interest, historical interest in the Forth Valley area, more to find out the history and how they work. For instance, we had a very interesting day at Callendar House, the museum in Falkirk, and one of our members is in fact one of the Forbes family who lived there 100 years ago. He was a grandson of the last Forbes owner. So he gave a kind of personal reminiscence of what the place was like pre-Second World War. And then we had the Falkirk History Society talking about the role of the museum today and how they operate the place. And it was a very, very interesting day.
Well, both of you have had a very long association with Forthgiving. If I could ask you, Ellen, how did you come to be involved in the society and its work?
Well, the reality is somebody asked me if I was interested in supporting a charity, and the way she described it was that helped the poor. Now, given my own background, that was like somebody saying, we think you would be really good at doing this because you've once been poor yourself. And what has been fascinating for me, I was reading the other day, the phrase that we constantly read and hear in the news at the moment is the cost of living crisis. And that phrase for me encapsulates exactly why this charity is so desperately needed. The cost of living crisis, when you look around, for example, Stirling, which has very affluent areas in it, etc. But the reality is last winter 42% of the people in Stirling could not afford to put their heating on over Christmas. And you think to yourself, well, how did that happen? Well, it happened for a whole range of reasons. But what fascinates me when I listen to Nick talking about how this charity began is that there's actually not much difference. There are still ideas around the deserving and the undeserving poor, and when you see television programmes that talk about scroungers and people on benefits, the actual reality is that although we we say that we live in a welfare society, the reality is very, very different. So the reality of claiming benefits nowadays does not keep you out of being poor. And being poor is not just about money. And one of the things that I think that as an organisation, I think we continue to do really well is, okay, we're probably the only charity locally that will put money into somebody's bank account. But do you know the other thing, and probably the best thing we do, is that we show that we care. Because if you are poor, if you are financially poor, you are locked off from a whole range of different things. And psychologically, you are likely to suffer mental health problems. You're constantly worried. You don't see an end to it. And you think to yourself, I'm on my own. But this charity says, no, you're not on your own. Somebody cares enough to actually respond to your request. And I think that is huge, absolutely huge.
Yes, it was the great author Terry Pratchett who said the worst thing about poverty is that it's a very expensive thing to have to deal with. And how true that is, you know, and I think that's the wonderful thing. You're absolutely right about the practical solutions that Forthgiving provides to help people in practical ways. Now, Nick, you've been the secretary for the past 15 years, but your history with the society goes back even further than that, doesn't it?
Yes, I think, as I mentioned, my wife and I joined as members sometime in the 1990s. We were sort of collared by a friend who said, this is a good sort of organisation to belong to. Come along and join us. And in those days, almost the only thing that seemed to happen was a black tie dinner in mid-January. And I'm very glad that we moved on from those days, frankly, because I was then invited to become a director on the board. And I was almost embarrassed by the lack of process in the whole grant making process, procedure. It seemed to depend on who knew of anything that was worthy of support. There was no system to it at all. And I think we as a charity have come on by leaps and bounds since those days. As Ellen has said, I mean, we are, I think, doing a very good job in a field where there is a desperate need, and we are one of the very few charities that actually gives money directly to individuals and families. That's very rare.
Yeah, which, as you rightly say, is needed more than ever between the rise in energy costs, the rise in home rental, and mortgage payments. All those things all add up, and as you rightly say, anything that's going to make a practical difference to people's lives has got to be something that is celebrated. Now, as you say, that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about the society, is the way that it balances its philanthropic aims with its heritage, its cultural heritage. And the Old Hansel Monday event, actually, when you look back, was quite an august occasion in the Scottish social calendar, because it marked the end of the Hogmanay celebrations.
Yes.
I think it was known as the Daft Days, wasn't it? It ran from,
It
ran from Hogmanay all the way through to Old Hansel Monday. So for anyone outside of Scotland, that was that was definitely one of those celebratory periods at a point really when Christmas wasn't even a bank holiday in Scotland.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to know that it still plays that part, isn't it, in the Stirling social history. And also, it's one of those organisations I think that people often mention in the same breath as things like the Stirling Gildry. And other historical societies in and around the city. So it's good to know that it has that connection with places like the Stirling Smith Art Gallery and Museum, which I think was founded in 1874. it's very much part of Stirling's history now.
Yeah.
And the thing that impresses me the most, of course, is the fact that it's really perhaps fair to say that it's more active now than it's ever been.
Indeed.
In terms of
Yeah.
helping people.
Indeed, yes.
Yes.
And I think I would also emphasise, Tom, that in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, the board's been really, really effective, in my view, in looking at serious issues about how do you want to be seen by people out there, what does our brand look like, and this, of course, led to Forthgiving being adopted as a name, and I'm very pleased to say that it was Ellen who actually came up with the name. And I think it sums up what we are and what we do brilliantly. Sons of the Rock Society, to be honest, is a fairly sexist title that is completely inappropriate for a trading charity in this day and age. But we've kept the name in the legally registered charity with Oscar. So it still exists, but in the background.
Yes.
And we are still a membership organisation. People can join us, and we're looking for more members all the time, because it's great that, I mean, financially, all our grants are funded from donations. Our investment income and subscriptions is what covers our admin costs.
Yes.
So it's great to be able to go out there and say every penny you give us goes into our grants pot.
Yes, and that's a very, very important point that you've made, actually, that Forthgiving doesn't just cover Stirling and the ancient borough of Stirling, but Clackmannanshire and Falkirk as well. Both of them, very historical parts of Scotland, and areas that have a very diverse population. So it's very important, isn't it, to get the word out that it covers all of those areas as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking about recently was that I'm a newbie in terms of relationship with Nick. I've only been around for 10 years. So, but the organisation has been really brave in that it has had to move with whatever was happening out there, and therefore it had to be really fast on the ball if it wanted to actually make sure that they were doing what they said they were going to do. And one of the things that's happened most recently was as a result of COVID. And COVID had a huge effect on people's lives, in all sorts of different ways. And one of the ways, I did a wee survey of our applications during the 2 years and beyond the 2 years that COVID was rife. And the rise in domestic violence was, it was difficult to, it was difficult to say, well, why should this be? And then when you think about it, of course, relationships in poverty are difficult to sustain. And if they're not strong relationships, they crumble. And it's usually women with children who are affected most. I'm not being sexist when I say that, but the reality is that women's aid during the time of the 2 years of COVID was absolutely full of women and children who had to flee domestic violence. And the only way that they could actually say to people, I need help, was through women's aid. So of course we need to keep close links with a huge range of organisations across Falkirk, Clackmannan and Stirling. And Women's Aid was one of those organisations. And it's like weaving a blanket, because the connection between people, their psychological, their mental state, their physical state, what's happening to them is all important. So the organisations that deal with all sorts of different things, Citizens Advice Bureau, Salvation Army, churches, we have created a web of relationships, mainly through Nick, I have to say. a lot of really good and warm relationships, so they know that we do what we say on the tin.
Yes.
And I was in a senior secondary school in Stirling recently, speaking to 6 S3 pupils, and it was absolutely fascinating. The particular school has a wide, gets pupils from a wide area within Stirling, and Stirling has particular areas. Some are areas where the poverty is higher, and some are areas where there are more rich people. It's much the same in most towns, I would think. But what was fascinating was that these young women, about 15, were all in the same class, but they all had completely different experiences.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to them about what do we mean by poverty, they would say, oh well, everybody's got a mobile phone. There isn't anybody that doesn't have a mobile phone these days. Of course, that is nonsense. So I think one of the things this organisation has been really good at, and we will continue to be good at, is that we make the connections. We make both the psychological connections in terms of poverty and the reality, the money connections. You need to buy, like we recently had a request from a couple living in a rural part of Stirling because they were freezing. They couldn't afford to have any heating, and they were an elderly couple. When I joined, I never thought that I would be signing a slip that said, when I was saying yes to an application, about buying bags of coal. And it actually reminded me of, I had gone into the archives ages ago to have a look at what had happened in the early days. And one of the first entries in one of the first meetings of the organisation, at the top of what we call the top of the town, which is just down from the castle, it was a young 14-year-old boy that didn't have any winter shoes.
Yes.
And this organisation was able to get winter shoes for him. His name was Billy. And this, in some ways when you look back, you think it's terribly sad that as a world we have not moved beyond this. It is sad, but as long as this organisation can maintain its status and can continue to fundraise and get more and more donations, we will be supporting people, men, women and children, who need it most.
Yes, and that is a vitally significant thing actually, because many of the issues that you've brought up there are issues which sadly are still no longer widely discussed, and they should be, because Forthgiving has very much as part of its ethos a commitment to care for the entire person, doesn't it? I mean, not just their domestic well-being, but their mental health, their sense of well-being as well. And I think it's such an important issue, because I think more and more now, because of the many different stresses of modern life, there has to be a greater emphasis on the many different parts of the individual, and how their well-being might be maintained in these challenging times. Now, you mentioned that the organisation is still seeking members. How would people find out more about Forthgiving and how they might get involved?
I think nowadays we would recommend they go online in the first instance, and you find the membership page on our website, which I think we need to read to probably develop a lot further than it is at the moment. But that would be the first port of call, and I'm still quite old-fashioned about these things. I believe leaflets also have a role to play, and it would be very good to update our leaflet too.
Yes, and the website would be forthgiving.org.uk, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would certainly recommend anyone who has an interest certainly go online, find out more about the social media channels and the various different information that can be discovered on the website relating to the society and its aims in the present day. So I would have to ask both of you, where do you see things going in the future for Forthgiving? How do you think it can adapt to meet changing needs?
I think, as Ellen has said, the fact we have adapted so much in the last 10, 15 years, I think you know, I think that will stand us in good stead in terms of our organisational culture. We encourage quite a sort of regular throughput of new people coming onto the board, and I mean I've now worked with, I think it's 7 different precies or chair in my term as secretary, and it's very interesting. Each one has brought something slightly different to the party, and I think that's benefited the organisation greatly, and I think that's one of our strengths.
Yes.
So as long as we continue doing that, I think the future will be much as it should be, very successful.
Yes.
I would like to see, given my increasing age, I would like to see younger people getting involved. And when I was speaking to the S3 girls in the secondary school, it's quite fascinating because they said, could we join? Now, I've never ever been asked by a 15-year-old if they could join this organisation. It's usually been word of mouth as far as I know, because that's how I found out about it. But we need young blood. We need young blood, partly because of the rise in the use of the technology, partly because we are looking at a cohort of people who do not have access to the things that many people automatically have access to. And therefore we need more people who are in the position of being poor as trustees. And for me that would be absolutely wonderful,
Yes.
because that would help shape, it would give legitimacy, and it would help shape the organisation, because the poor are not going to be given loads of money anytime soon.
Yes. Yes.
So I think we need to hear their voices. We need to hear their voices.
Yes. And for such a long-running organisation as Forthgiving, and obviously Sons of the Rock before it, it's by nature a multi-generational kind of effort, and it would be wonderful to see that continue for another 200 years and more.
Couldn't agree more.
So,
Yes.
Nick and Ellen, thank you so much for having taken the time to join us today. I'm really grateful to you both for having spoken about so many really vitally important issues which are affecting not just people here in the Forth Valley area, but right across the country and beyond. I think there has never been a more important time for people to become active in supporting each other in a community-minded way. And I think there can be few organisations that have the community more in mind than Forthgiving has had. So thank you both for having taken the time today to speak about your own experiences.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Tom.
Thank you.
Just a reminder that if you would like to find out more about Forthgiving, you can visit their website at forthgiving.org.uk, or you can check them out on various different social media platforms. Thank you very much for having joined us today. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.